Hello everyone. This is a very quick but very weird episode about this one certain incident that I recently learned about, and this thing was just such a strange thing that even though I have other videos in the pipeline, I could not let it go. Yes, today we're going to be very quickly talking about one of the most bizarre, deadliest, and least known traffic accidents in the history of the recent decade. It's certainly not the deadliest traffic accident. I mean, there have been like far worse accidents in India, some of the African countries, whatever. But certainly it's still one of the deadliest in Turkish history, and it's very strange why this bizarre acid meltdown, mass melting incident of 1965 is not more known. So we're gonna correct that, and I'm just gonna briefly tell you about it. This was such a strange thing that when I first heard about this thing, I really didn't believe it. I thought it was an urban legend, but then I did some archival research, tried to look at contemporary newspapers, and boy, it seems like something like this really happened. So let's get our minds into gear. The soundtrack of this episode is by Jack Horner of the Aliens Ensemble. So the year is 1965 in Turkey, and people are on a bus journey, on a bus pretty much like this one. This is a 1960s bus and traveling on a 1960s road in Turkey. Even though the road is a main highway leading from Istanbul to Ankara, basically. This is Istanbul, this is Ankara. So a lot of people were on this type of bus going from here to here, okay? And they were kind of like going along until they reached a place named Hendek, near the city of Izmit. Coincidentally, if you check my channel, I have a travel adventure video to Izmit, and Izmit is a great place. But that night in 1965, the rural Hendek area near Izmit was not a great place because something really awful happened. And boy, this is like the weirdest incident. So it's gonna be hard not to talk about this in a sort of theatrical way, but also a lot of people passed away in this accident, so still I have to like kind of be respectful to their memories. But what happened was they were driving along this like dusty, misty road in the dark, and remember, back in those days highways did not have illumination at all. The road was like, it was an okay road, but still it was not like a typical highway today. In today's highways, you got lights all over the place. You got road strips, those little glow-in-the-dark pieces of shits along the road. And in most highways, even in rural Turkey now, you got lights illuminating the highway. And I cannot tell you, if you've ever driven long distances at night, I cannot tell you what a difference that makes. Like, if you drive in those like 1960s types of roads, you really can't see anything, even though it's a comparatively good road. So what happened was 26 people melted to death. And I was like, unbelievable. So apparently there was a collision between a truck loaded with nitric acid, also known as kezap in Turkish. And here, this is the sensationalist Turkish newspaper. It changed hands several times since 1965, but it's still like a populist, sensational rag, as it always was. And it says, in the bus that collided with the acid-loaded truck, 26 passengers melted to death. And then here's like a little side story. The acid that melts people down, kezap, nitric acid. And it says, it's a very strong acid. Blah, blah, blah. I can't read some of it, and it basically tells the history of nitric acid. And I really had difficulty. So what happened was that, I'll zoom in. There was a truck loaded with nitric acid or hydrochloric acid, basically. It says acid nitric here, so I think it's nitric acid. So what happened was, at the dark road, this truck kind of went off the road and into a kind of ditch, and it ended up spilling all the acid, which kind of formed a little lake or something by the side of the road. The truck did not suffer any damage. So the bus driver did not see this truck and kind of careened into the same ditch, trying to stop maybe, I don't know. And that's when the carnage really began. It was really awful. So people started getting out of the bus, and this happened in the dead of the night. So imagine you're like sleeping on a midnight bus ride in 1960s semi-rural Turkey, and suddenly there's an accident. What do? You try to get out of the bus. So the first people started getting out of the bus, and they started falling into the lake of nitric acid, and they started melting and dying and screaming. And because they were melting, a lot of smoke was coming out. So the rest of the passengers also thought there was a fire on board the bus. And tragically, there was no such thing. And they jumped out of the bus. And because they saw all the smoke, they tried to jump into this liquid, which they thought was a puddle of water. And remember, this is just as they woke up from the terrible accident. So everyone, like in a kind of lemming herd mentality, starts jumping into the lake of acid. Just like everyone starts melting and sinking and dying and screaming. Other people think it's a fire. They scream, they fall into the water. It's abnormal. It's ghastly. And remember, before seeing these photographs, I thought it was like one of those tall tales, because Turkish people and the Turkish press really likes, like, if you think you have fake news now, whoa boy, think about the 60s, 70s, 80s. Without the internet to verify things, fake news was endemic in Turkey, and I think in all over the world. So I thought this was like some exaggerated bullshit story, but when I saw these photographs, they're carrying out the remains of the dead, and they're really like molten, like those movie prop skeletons. And in others, like, you see the pit of bodies. Fortunately, this is not in color, but it's still extremely gruesome. It says they could only recover some of the bodies, and like, even though it's like a black and white story and it's kind of an over-the-top story, you kind of put some distance into it. When you see the actual people, it's really hard to read. So it says, again, another newspaper, it says all wards of the Izmit State Hospital were overcome by the stench of burning flesh. I mean, these journalists, I don't know. And this one guy said, "Kill me, I can't take this pain anymore." And then you got some more clips of like people who suffered in this disaster. The driver was like covered with burns, and he succumbed to his injuries. This was also this was the driver of the truck. So he fell into the acid and he succumbed to his injuries. The driver of the bus escaped only with some light burns in his leg. So maybe he just started jumping into the acid lake and just jumped back out in the last instance. This 11-year-old girl barely survived, and I guess this lady must still be alive today. And this poor lady lost 3 of her relatives, so I can't even like exaggerate or like comment too much on them. These are like really disturbing losses and awful losses, which may have been prevented, I don't know. And then in other newspapers, so this was spoken all over the country. This newspaper says, the most horrific traffic accident of the year. 27 passengers burned with acid and died. And here's the picture of the acid truck. And I guess this was where the acid collected, and this was where the people jumped in and died. And 18 people were buried in this lake of acid, it says. So quite awful and quite sad. And this is just one of the weirdest traffic accidents I have ever read about. I was when I was a teenager, I was always an avid reader of these books about like 1001 amazing facts, amazing incidents, weird deaths, weird accidents, whatever. And I mean, this story took me back to those days, and I believe like, I mean, it's just harrowing to think about. Because normally you think like a traffic accident, I mean, traffic accidents are horrible. I mean, I've lost people I've known in traffic accidents, and I guess many of you may have either as well. But to melt to death en masse in a roadside accident, like, it's one of those things you say, gosh, golly darn, this could only happen in Turkey. So anyways, that was that sad story, weird story. Thanks for watching, and if you want to support me, please support me on patreon.com/cmkozeman. You could also support me on buymeacoffee.com, and the links are in the video description. The links to the news stories are also in the video description. And also, do you have any similar weird stories from your part of the world, whether you are in the States, India, Bangladesh, Brazil, Argentina, I don't know. Tell me about it and we can talk about these in the comments. And as usual, this has been CM Kozeman. Goodbye.